All this food for us?
Luke Barrett carried his wife's trunk up the porch, steps the way he carried everything. Without comment, without ceremony. One task following the next until the day was done. He did not know, setting it down inside the kitchen door, that he was about to learn something about her that 7 weeks of careful conversation in Baker City had never once mentioned. He had married Julia Hartwell the day before a justice of the peace, with her sister Martha and Ephraim standing witness. He had chosen her slowly, with his eyes open, because she answered his questions honestly and never once pretended the ranch would be easy. Not even on the hardest questions he'd asked her. She had chosen him for the same plain reason. Neither had spoken of love. Both had spoken more than once of respect. She stood in the middle of his kitchen. Their kitchen, though the word did not yet feel true, looking at the cold stove and the bare shelf. Luke watched her take it in the way she took in most things, quietly, without complaint, filing it away. "I'll manage," she said, and meant it. He nodded once and went back out to the barn, because there was always something in the barn. By 6 that evening, 4 ranch hands came in stamping cold off their boots, expecting the plain supper that had become ordinary since Luke's mother passed. Thin stew, biscuits like river stones, coffee you could tar a roof with. What they found instead stopped them in the doorway. Wesley Crane went still with his hat halfway off his head. Ned Parker, 24 and always hungry, made a sound low in his throat that wasn't quite words. Hugh Lancaster simply looked at the table a long moment before he sat down, easing his weight onto the bench the way a man does when a joint has been complaining all day. Frank Dobbs said nothing at all, which from Frank was its own kind of announcement. Roast beef, done properly, potatoes with real butter, bread that had risen twice, a pie already on the second night. Luke ate slowly. He did not say much. But halfway through the meal, he set his fork down the way a man sets down something he isn't sure he's allowed to want twice, and Julia, watching without seeming to watch, saw it. "Ma'am," Ned finally managed, mouth still half full, "did you cook all this yourself?" "I did." Frank reached for a second helping without asking. That was Frank's version of a compliment, and everyone at the table understood it as such. Ned eyed the last biscuit on the plate for a long moment, clearly working out whether a third would be noticed. Julia passed him the plate without a word, and without looking up from her own supper. Wesley said little, as he generally did. He ate steadily, thoroughly, the way he did most things, and when he passed near the stove later to hang his coat, he noticed Ned had left a glove on the woodbox. He tossed it back to him without breaking whatever he was saying to Hugh about the weather. Hugh, for his part, took a second helping of gravy, and none of the beef, which nobody remarked on because nobody had ever seen him do otherwise. Nobody had told Luke his new wife could cook like this. He hadn't asked. In 7 weeks of careful, honest conversation about land and money, and how a man ought to treat his hired help, cooking had never once come up. He had chosen her for her mind. He was only now beginning to understand how little of the rest of her he actually knew. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm. Neither of them announced out loud. Julia rose before light and worked the kitchen into shape, coaxing the old stove into a temper she could trust, learning which of the 4 men ate light and which ate like the meal might not come again. She noticed things without being told. That Wesley checked the gate latch twice out of habit, not worry. That Ned reached for biscuits early and then pretended he hadn't. That Hugh took more gravy than meat and never complained about the knee that plainly bothered him on cold mornings, favoring instead the chair where he could stretch one leg beneath the table without announcing why. That Frank arrived 5 minutes early while insisting he hadn't, and saved his pie crust for last like a man rationing something. One evening, Hugh moved a chair a few inches without a word, clearing the path Ned kept blocking. Another night, Frank lifted Ned's hat off Julia's chair with 2 fingers and dropped it back in his lap without pausing his sentence to Hugh about a horse neither of them could agree on. Ned never noticed either time. He rarely noticed much beyond his own plate and his own opinions, which Wesley occasionally corrected in a single dry sentence delivered a beat after Ned had already moved on to something else. Luke noticed her noticing. He began, without deciding to, staying in the kitchen a little longer after the men cleared out. Nothing important kept him there most nights. He told himself it was the coffee. One evening in the second week, he mentioned a fence line that kept needing mending, more than a fence line should. Julia, drying a plate, said mildly that the ground on that side of the pasture always looked wrong to her after rain. Softer, slower to dry, though she couldn't have said why, not being a rancher. "You've a lot to say for a quiet woman," he said. "I say plenty," Julia answered. "You simply hadn't asked." He didn't have an answer for that. Later in the week, checking the fence himself, he found standing water pooling exactly where she'd described, and understood what it meant for the posts, even if she hadn't. He did not say so directly when he came back in, boots muddy to the ankle. He only remarked, hanging his coat, that the ground was softer than he'd figured. Julia let it pass without comment. Not everything she noticed amounted to something. When Luke asked her, a few days later, what she made of a buyer's letter about spring beef prices, she only shook her head. "I wouldn't know the first thing about that," she said, and meant it. And he didn't press her. The trouble arrived the way most trouble on a ranch arrives. Not as a crisis, but as news carried home from town. The Morrow outfit, 3 times the size of Luke's spread, was taking on experienced hands for the winter. Steady work through spring. Reliable wages. Frank heard it first at the mercantile and mentioned it at supper the way a man mentions weather. Luke didn't think much of it that first night. But by the following week, 3 of his 4 hands had quietly gone to look. Wesley said little. Ned said too much, talking about the remuda work. Morrow could offer a younger man work that might actually teach him something instead of just riding fence. Hugh, older and slower to speak, allowed only that his knee didn't take kindly to the long winter rides. Luke's spread required, and Morrow's closer, easier rounds might suit him better as he got on in years. Frank alone showed no interest. He liked knowing a place, he said, and didn't see the value in learning a new one at his age for the sake of somebody else's bunkhouse. Luke heard all this as one problem, requiring one solution. He began drafting, in his head, a single offer to keep his crew whole. Julia heard something different. She was in the kitchen most evenings when the men talked, present the way furniture is present, there, but not accounted for. She heard Ned's voice go quick and embarrassed over wanting real responsibility. She heard Hugh's voice go careful and sideways around his knee, as though admitting weakness cost him something. She heard Wesley say almost nothing, which she was beginning to understand meant more than most men's whole sentences. She noticed, too, that the talk changed the room in small ways nobody announced. Ned stopped whistling under his breath around the horses, the way he usually did. Hugh took his coffee, black and silent, 2 evenings running, without his usual dry word for Frank. Frank alone seemed unbothered, arriving 5 minutes early as always, claiming as always that he hadn't. "They're not all wanting the same thing," she told Luke one night, drying the last of the supper dishes. He looked up. "They all want steadier winter work. Ned wants to be trusted with something harder than fence work. Hugh wants less riding, not more money. I don't know yet what Wesley wants." Luke set down the harness he'd been mending. "You've been listening." "I've been in the room," Julia said. "Same as you. I simply wasn't doing the talking." He didn't answer that right away. When he did, it wasn't the answer she expected. "What do you think I should offer, Hugh?" It was the first time he had asked her opinion on ranch business since the wedding. Julia set down the plate she was holding. Lighter winter work. Feeding, fence repair close to the house, not the long rides. It isn't charity. He's earned the easier rounds after 30 years, and you'd be a fool to lose a man who knows this land better than you do. Luke thought about that for a long moment, then nodded once and went to find paper to write it down. It became, without either of them naming it, a habit. He asked. She answered, when she had an answer, and said plainly when she didn't. He tested what she said against what he already knew, and more often than not, found she'd seen something he'd missed. It was not romance, not yet. It was something quieter and, in its way, more binding. The particular trust of two people who had begun to rely on each other's judgment. The trouble that mattered came from Wesley. He found her alone in the kitchen one evening, drying the last of the pans while Luke was out checking stock before the light failed. He hung his coat, checked the latch on the door out of habit, and stood a moment longer than the errand required. "I've been thinking on Morrow's offer," he said, in his measured way, each word chosen as though it cost him something to spend. "I don't believe I'll take it." "Why not?" He was quiet a moment, turning his hat once in his hands. "Wouldn't seem right, ma'am. Not after everything you've done for this place. Leaving now, after you've made it what it is." He stopped there, as though the sentence had gotten away from him. Julia set down the pan she was holding. She understood, in that moment, exactly what was happening, and exactly what it would cost her to say so out loud. Wesley was not staying because Morrow's offer was weak. He was staying because he felt he owed her something, and a debt of gratitude was not the same as a reason. "Wesley," she said carefully, "is that truly why you're staying, or is it because you feel you ought to?" He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. "Don't stay for me," Julia said. "A good supper doesn't buy a man's winter." Wesley looked at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that she couldn't fully read. Then he nodded once, thanked her plainly, and went out to the bunkhouse without another word. 3 days later, he told Luke he'd be taking the position at Morrow's after all. Julia told her husband herself, before he could hear it secondhand. She found him in the barn, going over tack by lamplight. "Wesley's taking the winter position," she said. Luke straightened. "He told you?" "He told me he meant to stay. I told him not to stay for me." Luke set the bridle down slowly. "You told him to go." "I told him not to stay for a reason that wasn't his own." There was a long silence. Luke looked at her the way he might look at a fence line that had held for years and suddenly hadn't. "I wish you'd spoken to me before you said that," he said, finally. "That's a man I needed through the winter, Julia. You knew that." "I knew it. Then why not tell me first? Let me talk to him myself." "I was afraid of what you'd say." The words came faster than she meant them to, bare once they were in the air. She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. Luke went still for a moment. "That's not." He started and stopped and didn't try again. "You're right that I should have told you first," Julia said. "But I wouldn't have asked him to stay for me. Not even if you'd wanted me to." "I know," Luke said. He looked at her a moment longer than the conversation required, then picked the bridle back up and said nothing else. That night, at supper, nothing was said in front of the men. The food was the same. Luke thanked her the way he always did. But he did not linger after the meal the way he had every night that month. He sat with the winter roster spread in front of him, working figures by lamplight long after Julia had gone to bed, and, for the first time since the wedding, the easy quiet between them had gone somewhere she couldn't follow. She lay awake longer than she meant to, listening for his boots on the stairs, and did not hear them until well past midnight. The next morning, Julia was pouring coffee when Luke came in from checking the horses, boots loud on the cold floor, his breath still visible when he pulled off his hat. He sat, looked over a separate matter. which of the remaining men should take Wesley's rounds along the north fence. And after a moment, without looking up from the paper, he said, "What do you think?" Julia stood still for a moment, the coffee pot in her hand, steam curling up between them. "You still want to know what I think?" Luke looked up then. "I didn't say I wanted you to stop thinking. I said I wished you'd told me first. Those are two different things." "Fair enough," Julia said, and sat down across from him and told him what she thought. He listened the whole way through, without interrupting, the way he always did. And when she finished, he nodded once and made a note in the margin of the roster, and neither of them said anything more about the barn, or Wesley, or the night that had passed between them. It did not need saying twice. Wesley left on a clear morning in the second week of November, with a handshake from Luke and a nod from Julia, that he returned with something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Obliged for the suppers, ma'am," he said. "Best I've had. Take care of yourself, Wesley." He rode out toward the morrow spread without looking back. The winter roster reshuffled itself in the weeks that followed. Hugh took the lighter rounds Julia had suggested and stopped favoring his knee so visibly, though he never once thanked her for it directly. He only started leaving the good chair by the stove for her, without comment, which she understood well enough. Ned, given more responsibility with the horses, stopped trying so hard to sound older than he was. And Frank found a fresh target for his teasing in the boy's newly serious manner. Frank remained exactly as he had always been, the fixed point around which the smaller adjustments turned. The ranch did not fall apart without Wesley. It simply became a slightly different place. One man's absence rearranging the shape of the rest, the way a missing hand at cards changes how the others play. And between Luke and Julia, something had rearranged itself too. He sought her opinion now on matters that had nothing to do with staffing. Whether to sell 2 calves early or hold them through spring. She began in turn telling him things that weren't useful at all, that she'd disliked oatmeal her whole life and only ate it out of habit, that she missed a particular church bell from the 8 grown up in, from the town she'd grown up in, a sound she hadn't thought of in years until she found herself missing it. He listened to these the way he listened to ranch matters, which was itself something she noticed and did not mention. Once, without being asked, he brought her a jar of the wild honey a neighbor had traded him for hay, because she'd mentioned once, weeks back, that she preferred it to sugar. She hadn't expected him to remember. One evening in late November, with the men gone to the bunkhouse and the kitchen quiet, Luke did not leave the table when the meal was finished. Julia noticed it before she understood it. The way he stayed seated a beat, too long after his plate was empty. The way his hand rested on the table's edge instead of reaching for his hat. She kept clearing dishes, giving him room to speak or not, the way she'd learned to do with him. "Leave those a minute," he said. She set the last plate down and sat across from him. The lamp between them threw more shadow than light. For a moment, neither of them said anything. And the quiet had a different weight than the strained quiet of a few weeks back. Not tension this time, but something that hadn't yet found its shape. "I've been turning something over," Luke said, and then didn't say it. He looked at his own hands instead, as though the words were written there and he'd lost his place. Julia waited. It was, she realized, the first time she'd ever seen him uncertain of what to say next. "I don't want an arrangement, Julia." He said it plainly, the way he said most things, though it cost him more than most things did. "I want you." Julia didn't answer right away. She was aware of her own pulse, aware that this was a moment she hadn't let herself imagine wanting, back when she'd stood in a stranger's kitchen and told herself she was only asking for a roof and a fair man. She reached across the table, not dramatically, just her hand finding the back of his wrist, the way it might find anything familiar in a dark room. "You asked what I thought the morning after Wesley left," she said, "before either of us had smoothed a thing over. That wasn't courtesy. Courtesy doesn't cost a man anything." Luke turned his hand over beneath hers, an unpracticed, almost clumsy motion, as though he wasn't entirely sure it was permitted. "I chose you the first time because you made sense," he said. "I'm choosing you again because I want you at this table, whether you make sense or not." It was not a fine speech. He stumbled over the last of it, and the lamp wanted trimming. But Julia found she did not want a finer one. Luke almost laughed, caught it halfway, the way he always did, and this time he let it show. A few days later, Luke had business in Baker City. Feed orders, a matter at the bank, nothing that required more than one pair of hands. "I'm going in Thursday," he told her at breakfast, not looking up from his coffee right away. "Thought you might like to come." "Do you need me for it?" "No." A pause, longer than the question warranted. "I'd like you there." Julia looked at him a moment, understanding exactly what he was offering, and exactly what he wasn't. "Then I'll come," she said. Word got round the bunkhouse by mid-morning that Julia would be gone through supper. Ned wondered loudly how the crew would survive an evening without a proper meal. Frank told him he'd managed before October and could manage again, though he was already, quietly, working out what he'd fry up instead. Hugh said nothing, but looked disappointed enough to make Julia laugh out loud, and Wesley's absence from the joke was its own small reminder of what the ranch had traded for peace. Luke was unmoved. They would manage one supper. They left that Thursday morning under a hard blue sky, the wagon creaking over frozen ruts toward Baker City. Luke's business waiting at the other end. But no reason at all for Julia to be there except that he wanted her beside him. Neither of them said much on the road. Neither of them needed to. If you've ever wondered whether the person you chose for good, sensible reasons could ever become someone you choose again, for no reason but wanting them, I hope this story gave you something to sit with. Have you ever had your own judgment tested by someone you trusted and watched them stay steady anyway? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed spending this evening with Luke and Julia, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories like it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.